They didn't come for the blueprints. They came for the inheritance. The three of them, well-dressed, vaguely impatient, each with somewhere better to be, sat in the polished office of Samuel Kessler's attorney. A place they hadn't entered when he was alive. Now, it held value. Samuel had been gone for 5 weeks. A quiet passing. No funeral, just a note left behind requesting no gatherings, no fuss. He'd spent his final years in a care facility his children had selected. "You'll be safer here, Dad," they'd said. Then left. One by one. Now they returned, because the will was being read. The attorney cleared his throat. Mr. Kessler did not leave behind a traditional will. June, the eldest, raised an eyebrow. "So there's no estate?" "Oh, there's an estate," the attorney replied. But Mr. Kessler preferred a different kind of documentation. He handed each of them an envelope. One for June. One for Daniel. One for Alex. Inside, a map. A key. And a short letter. Each letter began the same way. "This house has something to show you. Not just walls and beams. Something of me. Something of you. If you care to look." June frowned. "He sent us back to our own houses." The attorney nodded. "He built them. He said you never saw what he put into them." Silence. Samuel had been an architect. Not the flashy kind. The quiet kind who noticed how the morning light hit a child's bed, or how the wind curled around porches in winter. He designed each of their homes by hand. Every detail had meaning. They never asked why. Until now. Each of them returned home that evening. Each carrying more curiosity than they'd admit. Daniel found the first mark under a drawer in his study. Etched carefully into the wood, "This desk was built with your mother's hands. You never asked where it came from." June unlocked a cabinet she didn't remember being locked. Inside, a box of photographs. All of her, ages 5 to 15. Each one labeled. The final one read, "The day you stopped calling me Daddy." Alex found a floorboard that lifted cleanly. Beneath it, a small scroll. A blueprint. Of the house. But annotated, every window, every corner, every angle, marked with moments. "Your laughter, age 7. The spot you cried the night you failed your first exam. Where I stood when I said I was proud." None of them spoke to each other that night. But none of them slept. Their homes had become museums. Not of architecture. Of memory. And for the first time, they began to see that what they inherited wasn't money. It was something far heavier. Their father's voice. Built into the walls. Samuel Kessler never built for applause. He built for quiet. For shelter. For people who never thought to ask why the kitchen window caught the exact light of a sunset, or why the stair rail always felt warm in winter. He built like a man carving memory into wood, and hiding love beneath foundation stone. His hands were his biography, scarred, strong, and gentle. They'd raised 3 children. Buried a wife. Designed homes for strangers and then for those he loved. And they had all forgotten him. When Miriam died, the world closed in. She had been his laughter, his rhythm. The children mourned, briefly. Then they returned to cities and deadlines. June took over her firm. Daniel pushed deeper into his marriage and career. Alex, the youngest, floated from job to job, never rooted, always wanting more. They each asked Samuel for something at one point. A down payment. A design. A bailout. A babysitter. He never said no. Instead, he gave them homes. Homes shaped from his own grief and hope. He built June's house on the curve of a hill, angled just so her bedroom would catch the moonlight. Daniel's had a library with hand-built shelves, each one measured to fit the books they read together when he was small. Alex's had hidden compartments, a secret loft, things he'd once dreamed of as a child. But they never saw. They moved in, made renovations, repainted walls. Modernized. Gutted. The details disappeared. Like him. As years passed, their visits faded into holiday texts. Calls were missed. Questions went unasked. They referred to their father as doing fine, even when they hadn't seen him in months. So when Samuel's knees gave out and he struggled to rise from the chair he'd built himself, no one was there. When he forgot the kettle on the stove, it was the neighbor who knocked. Then came the talk. "You need care, Dad. Just until you're stronger." He nodded. Because they were right. And because fighting for presence felt harder than accepting absence. In the care facility, he became smaller. Quieter. Staff liked him, he told good stories. Drew on napkins. Spoke little of his family. Instead, he began sketching. Not new homes, but old ones. Memory homes. Recreations of what he'd built, annotated not in feet and inches, but in moments and regrets. Each sketch held a message. Not accusations. Just truths. He had given his children the architecture of his love. And in return, they had moved the furniture. So Samuel began planning what he would leave. Not in money. Not in things. But in silence that spoke. It didn't happen all at once. It was a slow erosion. Samuel noticed it in small absences first. A birthday forgotten. A thank you that never came. The quiet assumption that he would always say yes, because he always had. June began referring to the house he built for her as the property. She hired decorators who gutted the reading nook Samuel had designed to mimic her favorite childhood library. When asked about it, she said, it wasn't functional. Daniel used his house as a showpiece. Cocktail parties, networking events. He replaced the handcrafted oak door with a modern steel slab. Curb appeal, he said, when Samuel asked. Alex rented his out. The house with secret panels and lofts, meant for daydreams, was now an Airbnb. None of them invited him back after the initial housewarming. Then came the decision. After a brief hospital stay and a mild fall, the children gathered. Not around his bedside, but in a conference call. "It's time to move him into care," June said. "It's not safe," said Daniel. "He won't fight it," Alex added. They were right. Samuel didn't fight. They sold his house, his home. The one he built for Miriam, brick by brick, memory by memory. June took the lead on paperwork. Daniel arranged movers. Alex took a few tools, for nostalgia. No one asked what he wanted. He was moved into a care facility with polite nurses and a clean room. The staff said, "You're lucky. Most residents don't get visitors." He smiled and said nothing. Because neither did he. They sent occasional texts. Generic. Delayed. "Hope you're settling in. Let us know if you need anything." He never did. And when the lawyer, an old friend, asked Samuel if he wanted to draft a formal will, Samuel shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "I'll leave them something else. Something they wouldn't know how to sell. Something they'd have to live inside. Not vengeance. Architecture." Each home was already built. All he had to do was guide them back to what they'd ignored. He made maps. Wrote short letters. Marked the beams and panels they'd never noticed. And when he was done, he folded the final blueprint, tucked it beneath his pillow, and waited. Not to be remembered. To be understood. The room was quiet, but Samuel wasn't sleeping. He lay on his side, the blanket pulled up to his chest, the final blueprint tucked beneath his pillow. Outside, a soft rain whispered against the windowpane. Somewhere down the hallway, a nurse laughed too loudly. A tray clattered. Then silence returned. He had never been afraid of silence. But this silence felt different. It wasn't the peaceful kind that came after building something meaningful. It was the hollow kind, empty of voices, of purpose, of being needed. Each day bled into the next. Routine became his only companion, morning tea, brief walks with a cane, drawing rooms from memory. He stopped checking his phone. The battery had long since died. No one noticed. Meals came and went. He ate less. Spoke less. The nurses wrote "low energy" in his chart. Aging gracefully, one said. But there was no grace in the way Samuel folded inward. It wasn't surrender. It was retreat. He thought often of Miriam. Of the way she'd hum when brushing her hair. Of how she'd hold his face in her hands when words weren't enough. He had built their home like a love letter. Every stone a promise. Every window a vow. When she died, he tried to keep the house warm in her absence. But the cold had found its way in, not just into the walls, but into his children. He thought of them, too. June, always reaching, always sharp. Daniel, methodical, ambitious. Alex, sensitive, scattered. He remembered their birthdays. Their first scraped knees. The sound of their laughter in a hallway he no longer owned. How had it turned to this? He blamed no one. Life pulls people. Time numbs memory. But what haunted him wasn't what they did. It was what they'd forgotten. That he had loved them. Not with words, but with blueprints. With walls that curved to their footsteps. With rooms that absorbed their cries. With lights placed not for design, but for safety. And they'd repainted it. Gutted it. Rented it to strangers. He breathed slowly, feeling the ache in his bones. He wasn't angry. Just tired. The drawings stacked beside his bed weren't plans anymore. They were confessions. Memories. Love letters in ink and line work. He didn't know if they'd ever see what he left them. He only knew this. He had done everything he could. And no one could say he hadn't tried to be understood. The shift came quietly, without ceremony. Samuel was sitting by the window, the sun filtered through the curtain like diluted gold. He held a pencil, though his hands were more tired than steady. On the tray table beside him was a sketchpad, half filled with drawings, some detailed, some barely more than ghosts. It was the sound that changed things. A nurse had dropped a glass in the hallway. It shattered, a sharp, sudden punctuation in the middle of his stillness. Samuel flinched. Then, just as quickly, he stilled again. But something inside him stirred. Not anger. Not grief. Resolve. He reached for the sketchpad and began to flip through it. Page after page of homes, not as they were, but as he remembered them. The original designs. The dreams before they were gutted. The hidden meanings they never cared to notice. He realized something then. Something clean and hard. They would never ask him to explain. So he wouldn't. He would show them. Not through confrontation. Through architecture. Through silence. He turned to a fresh page and began drawing again, methodical, slow. Every line a memory. Every measurement a message. For June, he sketched her house as it once was, with annotations pointing to the window where she used to watch thunderstorms. The seat by the stairs where she hid with a flashlight and her favorite books. For Daniel, he detailed the library. Every shelf labeled with the name of a book they once read together. He added a note in the margin, "You loved the endings most, even when you pretended not to." For Alex, he drew the hidden loft again. This time, he included the inscription he had etched into the supporting beam, "You can always come back here." Words Alex had never seen. These weren't blueprints anymore. They were memories. But Samuel began treating them like maps. He numbered them. Catalogued them. Folded them with care. He enclosed short letters with each one, simple, plain. This space was built for you. If you care to see it. He asked his attorney to deliver the sets only after he was gone. Alongside the keys. Alongside the letters. No explanations. No apologies. Just an invitation. To notice. To feel. To walk the walls they had taken for granted, and hear the love they never thought to listen for. The decision gave him peace. He didn't need to change their minds. He only needed to leave them something they couldn't ignore. A blueprint they would have to read with their hearts. And in that quiet resolve, Samuel began to smile again. The houses were quiet. Each of them, June's on the hill, Daniel's nestled behind trimmed hedges, Alex's with its wide porch, stood exactly as Samuel had designed. Or so it seemed. But now, after the letters and keys had been delivered, the homes began to speak. It started with curiosity. Each of them returned home with their envelope, their key, and their own form of hesitation. June arrived first. The house was cold, though the thermostat was fine. She wandered to the reading nook that replaced her childhood alcove and sat there, remembering nothing. Until she saw the mark. Etched into the wall behind the newly installed shelves was a date, subtle, almost invisible without light, June 14, 1989. Her 9th birthday. The day it had stormed, and her father had built that very nook because she said she liked storms with a roof. Daniel was next. His library, sleek now, full of leather-bound books he never read, held a message beneath the lowest shelf. A panel slid loose. Inside, a folded note, "You always asked for one more chapter. I read them all, even the ones I didn't understand." Alex came last. His house was a rental now, lived in by strangers. But the lease had ended. He walked through it like a guest. In the closet of what used to be his room, behind peeling wallpaper, he found a tiny hatch. Inside was the blueprint of the loft. And scribbled in a corner, "This is where you said you'd be an astronaut. I believed you." None of them told the others. At first. But each found more. Panels that opened with a press. Drawers that stuck, until they didn't. And inside, letters. Small, folded, sometimes just a sentence. Not bitter. Not angry. Just real. "I wish you had asked me how I was doing. You never needed to say thank you. But you did need to look. I loved you. I still do. But I could not wait forever to be seen." In one of the kitchen drawers, June found a faded photo of Miriam. Behind it, "She asked me once if you'd remember this house as love or as furniture. I said it would be both. I hope I was wrong." For Daniel, the garage held an old tool chest. Inside wasn't tools, but storybooks. Worn copies, held together with tape. And beneath them, "I kept these because you stopped reading them. But I never did." Alex found a box in the attic. Inside, rocks, postcards, old matchbox cars. A museum of his childhood. A note on top, "If this house taught you nothing else, I hope it taught you that I was paying attention." Samuel didn't haunt them. He didn't lecture them. He let the walls speak. And for the first time, they listened. It was the silence that followed that carried the weight. June, always composed, found herself sitting in the reading nook late into the night. No lights, just the hush of wind against the windows. She began pulling books off the shelf, looking for more notes, more clues. What she found wasn't writing, it was memory. The way the wood still smelled faintly of cedar. The worn corner where she used to rest her elbow. She hadn't remembered. Now, she couldn't stop remembering. Daniel cancelled a business trip. His wife asked why, and he couldn't explain. He spent 3 evenings in the library, reading books he hadn't touched in years. When he found a receipt, faded, barely legible, tucked inside a novel from his college days, he realized it marked the last time he and his father had visited the old bookstore together. He stared at the date for an hour. Alex, once the most distant, stopped by the house more often. At first just to check on it, to make sure it hadn't settled wrong. But each time, he stayed longer. One afternoon, he found himself sitting in the old loft, surrounded by echoes of his childhood. He cried for the first time in years, not from guilt, but from the ache of being seen too late. They began to speak. June texted Daniel a photo of the etched date in the wall. Daniel replied with a picture of the storybook stash. Alex sent a message, simple, but heavy, did he leave something for all of us? They began to visit one another. First as siblings. Then as people trying to piece together someone they thought they knew. Their homes had become repositories of their father's love. But more than that, his quiet grief. They weren't angry. Not anymore. They were humbled. Hushed by how much they'd missed, and by how intentionally he had prepared this quiet reckoning. Each began changing, slowly. June donated her consulting time to local housing nonprofits. Daniel stopped taking calls during dinner and read to his daughter every night. Alex enrolled in a design course. Nothing radical. Just a realignment. Not because they were told to. Because something inside them had shifted. They weren't trying to make it up to him. They were trying to be the kind of people who would have noticed him, if given another chance. And even though it was too late to tell him in person, they carried his blueprints now, not on paper, but in the walls they rebuilt within themselves. The 3 of them stood at the foot of a grave. There was no ceremony, no audience, no words from a priest or pastor. Just them, siblings once estranged, now united by something far more complex than grief. The stone was simple. Samuel Kessler. Beloved husband, father, architect. He built what others couldn't see. June brought flowers. White lilies, like Miriam used to keep on the windowsill. Daniel brought a small book, one of the old storybooks from the hidden drawer. He placed it beside the stone with a quiet reverence that surprised even him. Alex brought nothing at all. Only his voice. I'm sorry, he said aloud, not to the others, but to the man beneath the ground. I was looking too far forward to see what was right here. June nodded, but didn't speak. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. For a moment, no one said anything. The wind moved the grass. A crow cawed somewhere in the distance. The silence was no longer hollow. It was full. They didn't speak of inheritance. Or regrets. Or blame. Instead, they made a pact, not formal, not spoken, but deeply felt. To see each other. To remember. To notice. They stayed a while. Not out of obligation, but because it felt right. When they finally left, they did so slowly. Together. And that night, each of them returned to their homes and saw them, not as structures, but as echoes. Of their father. Of who they had been. Of who they still could be. The confrontation had come and gone. And in its place, a quiet understanding had taken root. Healing didn't arrive in a single moment. It came quietly, like morning light creeping through a curtain, unnoticed until suddenly everything looked different. June returned to the reading nook. Not out of guilt, but need. She began reading again, not case files or briefs, but fiction. Books her father once kept. She reinstalled the old wood shelf Samuel had built by hand, sanding and staining it herself. When her daughter curled up there with a book, June sat nearby, listening to the quiet and wondering how many moments like this she had missed. Daniel dusted off the old drafting table he had moved to the garage years ago. He didn't draw, not the way his father had. But he used it to write, to journal, to sketch out memories, thoughts, things he wished he'd said. He left the book open in the library for anyone to read. His daughter added drawings in the margins. Alex did more than just visit. He moved back into his childhood home, refinished the walls himself. He didn't erase his father's touches, he preserved them. The loft, the panels, the etchings. He added his own too. A wind chime on the porch. A garden in the back. When he had guests, he pointed out the places his father had hidden love and memory and laughed when they looked confused. They began gathering again. Slowly. Birthdays. Small dinners. They didn't try to replace the years they'd lost. They honored them instead. Samuel's apprentice opened a small community design workshop. He named it the Kessler Studio, and above the doorway he hung a quote Samuel had once scribbled on a napkin: "Build with love, even if no one's looking." The siblings volunteered. Not out of penance, but because it felt good to give. Time softened. Not the memories, but the sharpness of regret. In its place came a gentler ache. The kind that doesn't wound, but deepens. Each home remained filled with Samuel's presence. But no longer as a monument to what they missed. Now, they were blueprints for how to live, intentionally, attentively, with hands that build even when thanks never come. And though he was gone, he lingered in the corners, in the curve of a staircase, in the light falling through a well-placed window, in the hush of a room built not just for shelter, but for seeing. They had learned how to see. And because of that, they had begun to heal. Some men leave behind empires. Others, echoes. Samuel Kessler left behind silence that speaks, walls that remember, and windows still catching the light just right. And in the end, it wasn't what he built with his hands that endured. It was what he built with his absence. Only when he was gone did they finally come home.